Now, analyst Dirk Kotzé is professor in political sciences at UNISA in Pretoria. He joins us now via Skype. Prof, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Now, let's look at what transpired today. Did Zimbabwe's politics have to turn out this way?
I think it is for many people is this real surprise that it happened so quickly and so dramatic as we've seen it over the day or day and a half now. I think what precipitated it was obviously the dismissal of the Vice President Mnangagwa and the statements made by especially the war veterans in the beginning and now also by the Defence Force in support of him. But I think many people have not anticipated that it will go specifically this way. Rather, they thought that over time President Mugabe will lose support and that some or other opposition party over time will take over. So this was, from that perspective, quite a surprise.
Prof, you mentioned that no one could have expected it to be as dramatic as we've seen it. Could have this been averted?
I don't think in the end it could have been averted. I think the main problem why there wasn't really any other option was the fact that, for example, the opposition parties have become very much fragmented. We know that there are 3 MDC groups at the moment, or parties. The opposition alliance is divided amongst 8 or 7 or 8 parties. So what was left, in a sense, and where power was really located within Zimbabwe, was really in the security services and more specifically in the hands of the military. So if we look back, in a sense, we should have said we must have actually predicted it or anticipated that at some point the military that we all knew or know as the real sort of is the real center of power in Zimbabwe, that they would have played a key role.
Speaking of the real center of power, Prof, why do you think, or what is the main reason, rather, the military decided to act now specifically? Is it because those elections are coming up next year?
Yes, I think so. The fact also that they have lost a very important person in the person of the Vice President Mnangagwa. He was definitely seen by them as one of their main supporters or their main persons who will represent them in the Zimbabwe government, the ZANU-PF government, and the fact that he was diverted away by President Mugabe, and then at the same time the fact that the appearance of the First Lady, Grace Mugabe, who has no links to the military establishment. She has no experience or credentials in terms of the war. She has no sort of direct links to the military or to the Defence Force. And therefore, they, I think, were scared that she's going to adopt an approach which will divert the power and the attention away from them, and that they will lose a lot of the influence in the end. And therefore, they had to stop it before it develops too far, that Mnangagwa loses too much of his political influence, is politically marginalized, like the former Vice President Joyce Majuru, who has lost a lot of her political power. I think they were scared that he will follow the same route as she.
Prof, I mean, this has been a clear indication of the divisions within the ZANU-PF party. Let's look at how today's events are going to affect it going forward.
Well, I think, first of all, some of the most key ministers in President Mugabe's cabinet have now been removed. Someone like Jonathan Moyo, for example, who has been like the public face, the public relations face of his group, the so-called G40 faction within the ZANU-PF party. They were all not removed. The Minister of Finance also, they are all being detained by the military. So in that sense, the core of President Mugabe's cabinet, over and above himself, where he's now confined to his residence, they have been removed. So I think the military made very much sure that there's no retaliation from the side of President Mugabe's group within the ZANU-PF, that they can make a comeback. There's very strong parallels, for example, with what happened about a year ago in Turkey, where there was also a coup and where the President Erdogan then could fight back because he had some control over some of the security forces. And I think they've learned from something like that to say they must make sure right from the start that there's no remnants left that President Mugabe could mobilize in order to fight back against the military.
Now, Prof, in terms of reaction, I mean, we saw the statement by SADC as well as Britain's Boris Johnson calling for peace and calm as well. But what's the best route for all Zimbabweans to now take going forward?
Well, I think it's a very comprehensive approach that should be followed. I don't know if it's going to happen, but from my point of view, I think first of all, the first priority will be to try to stabilize the economy. We know that the economy the inflation is rampant, that there's a cash flow problem, that there are problems with the currency, that the banks don't have enough money. So all of those are very serious problems, and it affects people's daily lives in an immediate sense. I think what is required is that if there is a clear change in government and that President Mugabe will leave government, and all the indications are that it will happen, that the incoming leaders will have to make a very clear statement about how they are going to approach the economic matters and the economic recovery. Because the international community, I think to a large extent, will be willing to become involved in it, but they need to have some clear messages or clear indications of what is the foreseeable future, economic future within Zimbabwe. I think, secondly, in terms of a political approach, I don't necessarily support what many people are saying, that they must try to prepare immediately for an election. We know that election is in the process, but given the fragmentation, the political polarization in Zimbabwe at the moment, I think no one is really ready for an election there. On the one hand, as I indicated, the opposition is very much fragmented, but even ZANU-PF also. There's the so-called G40 group and the Lacoste group, which really has caused the polarization within ZANU-PF. And then I think what is very important, and possibly one of the most difficult objectives of such a transition, is to depoliticize the security forces. And I think why it is so difficult is the fact that the military now demonstrated that they have really, that they are the center of political power in Zimbabwe at the moment, means that they have demonstrated to everyone that they are the key political players at the moment in Zimbabwe. And they will give up that position very difficult, or it will be very difficult to give up that position. And therefore, to depoliticize them and to hand it over to a civilian government will be very difficult to achieve. And then I think what is also important is that they have to start with some form of reconciliation. In the new constitution that was adopted by the Global Political Agreement, they included a commission for transitional justice, for restorative justice, almost something like a truth commission, but a permanent body in terms of the constitution. But they haven't really done much with that. And I think, given the history of Zimbabwe, the fact that we have, for example, people disappeared, like the activist Itai Jamara, or the death of the former vice president's husband, the General Solomon Majuru, there need to be answers for this, and the massacres in Matabeleland in the 1980s. And I think will be very necessary for the society of Zimbabwe to use this opportunity also to address those matters. So I think that there's a huge task ahead of the Zimbabwe before they can really start to think, or in order to lay a foundation before they go into elections and other forms of taking final political decisions.
Prof, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us on SABC News. That was political analyst Professor Dirk Kotzé joining us via Skype for the latest developments in Zimbabwe.